Tired of big tech clashing with your Catholic values? Fide Chat is now live on the Apple App Store and Google Play Store. It's private, encrypted, and built by Catholics for Catholics, with features like parental controls and more. Connect securely with family, friends, and groups. Download Fide Chat at fide.email. Technology without compromise.
We have an admission coming from a high-ranking prelate. Well, not really prelate, but maybe once they change the rules of ordination, she'll become a prelate, but a high-ranking official in the Roman Curia about essentially the church making a new religion with synodality. She doesn't use the words new religion. She dresses it up in the word salad that is often invoked here by the synodalists and by the ecumeniacs. We're going to talk about this, especially in light of a new document issued by Pope Leo, where we need to put aside these outdated theological debates and theological concepts in the name of unity. That was a new thing he said. And in his new document on it, he downplayed the filioque. I'm not saying that right, probably. I have a hard time pronouncing some words, no matter if I read them properly and hear others say them. But, such as it is. But it's the main dividing line, really, between the Orthodox and Catholic Church. And he downplayed it in a new document. And that's why it's key to understanding what the core element of this new religion is. So before we get to the news, I'm going to show you something to define the terms that they'll be using in light of what popes have written about this. You see, for about a century before Vatican II, maybe even longer, the popes were noticing emerging errors among the hierarchy and among lay theologians. And Pius X would define it as modernism, but the errors were around for a while beforehand. One of the core elements of modernism and core to understanding the new religion is this error called archaeologism. It should sound familiar. The core element of this is that we need to get back to an earlier understanding of Christianity. We need to get back to the way things were, not before Vatican II, but, back in the apostolic era. We need to go back all the way to that time. Here is why this is an error. This is from an article on the Unum Sanctum Catholicum blog. This is a magnificent explanation of this. Better than I could write myself. That's why we turn to them and give them the credit. So what is archaeologism? In his 1947 encyclical, Mediator Dei, Venerable Pius XII warned against what he termed an, quote, exaggerated and senseless antiquarianism in the reform of the sacred liturgy. This is 1947, and he was already responding to calls to reform the liturgy that would happen 20 years later. This preference for antiquarianism has subsequently become known as archaeologism, and from the 1930s till today has been one of the most prevalent schools of thought in discussions about Catholic identity. What is archaeologism? Why is it so prevalent? And why did Pius XII warn Catholics against it? How does it promote a distorted view of Catholic tradition? Archaeologism is not so much a heresy as a fad, a certain approach to Catholic liturgy and practice. Its distinguishing characteristic is an excessive value placed on those Catholic practices which came earlier in historical chronological succession. For the archaeologist, first is always best. A practice or prayer of the patristic church is better or purer than a practice of the medieval church. Consequently, the goal of any true liturgical renewal ought to be to return to the practice of the first Christians, inasmuch as possible. The modern church ought to imitate the apostolic church. There's also a couple of underlying assumptions in the error. And one is that the modern church is not the apostolic church. That somewhere the modern church broke off from the apostolic church. You see that claim made by Protestants, some Protestants. You see that claim made by the Orthodox. The modernists accept those arguments, essentially. And their way to fix the problem that they see is to return to how they define the apostolic church. They'll find some relics, essentially, some documents or something that they can interpret any way they want to. The clearest example that every single person watching this has encountered in their life is communion in the hand. You'll find one church father or one person associated with the fathers advocating for communion in the hand. But if you've actually read the church fathers, you will find that his position was rejected by his peers. Plenty of other church fathers spoke out against communion in the hand. Why did he allow it? No idea. But that's just one example. And so we go here. I'm going to show you Pope Leo briefly giving his endorsement of this a little bit. And it comes here from Catholic World Report a few days ago. They posted this to their Facebook page. In its second interim report issued last week, the Synodal Study Group on Controversial Issues continued to talk about a paradigm shift. Paradigm shifts are the language of revolution in some form or another. In continuity with Vatican II, and labeled the James Martin sin as an emerging issue. And I talked about that before. What that document basically said was the that sin James Martin has such a weird interest in for a Catholic priest is no longer controversial among people, among Catholics. It's now an emerging issue. It means it's moved one step closer to being normalized. That's what they do. And then they find to justify this. You've seen James Martin do this. You've seen the American bishops do this in their approval of a new translation of Scripture for private study that takes why God destroyed 5 cities in the Old Testament, which traditionally, according to the Scriptures and the traditional teachings of the Church, has been because of that sin James Martin has an unhealthy interest in for a priest. But they removed all reference to it, claiming it was now a matter of just impurity in general and an inhospitality. I can barely talk today, but is why God destroyed those cities. They'll take anything they can find and they will twist it to fit their narrative. So they're not even really engaging in archaeologism. To engage in archaeologism would be to, say, advocate for a restoration of deaconesses and following strictly what the early church said about deaconesses. The church moved away from deaconesses in like the 7th century or something. By the 9th century, they were completely gone in the West. And they did it for a good reason. No, I'm not saying the advocacy for deaconesses is the way the modernists advocate for, which is essentially women's ordination. Now, what did the most powerful woman in the Vatican have to say? We go here to the Radical Fidelity Substack. The headline, most powerful woman in the Vatican again tells the whole world they're inventing a new religion. Not only can she not say that the Church of Christ's mission is the salvation of souls, but she reduces it to the nonsensical and vague attitude that begins with listening to one another. The new religion is not about salvation because, dare we hope, all men are saved. You can find salvation by being a nice person and being the best tree hugger you can possibly be. Whatever your religion is, just be the best version of that you can be. As long as you're, engaging in dialogue and listening and accompaniment and being a generally good person, you can get to heaven. Disregard the fact, of course, that in a Christian sense, to be a good person, whatever that means that you are essentially a walking saint, right? And this is Natalie Bacourt, is who he's talking about here. I've covered her numerous times in the recent past. She is a nun. You wouldn't really know that, judging by the way she's dressed, but she's a woman religious who is one of the key figures of the Synod on Synodality. Here's his key point. But for those who still have 2 brain cells dialoguing and some semblance of rationality left, I would like once again not only to show, but to prove that this is a different religion from the Catholicism of the ages. Excuse me, I'm still sick. And of course, who better to support my argument than the very highest ranking proponents of this false new religion? In this case, unsurprisingly, a woman, and not just any woman, but one who is being called the most powerful woman in the Vatican, and was ranked as one of the top 50 most powerful women in the world by the U.S. magazine Forbes. That should tell you a lot. Yes, Forbes magazine declared the woman in charge, the woman helping run the Synod on Synodality, as one of the most powerful women in the world. Let me introduce you to French theologian and quote-unquote nun Natalie Bacourt, the Undersecretary of the General Secretariat of the Synod. Katholisch.English, the German church's mouthpiece, published a shockingly revealed interview with her, especially when it comes to the "it is a different religion" department. You can read the whole piece of textualized vomit here, but I want to pause and focus on only one of her replies. So put on your spiritual hazmat suit and follow me. And this is where it gets to it. The question she is asked is, Pope Leo XIV referred to cultural differences in the implementation process. How can synodality be lived in such different contexts without jeopardizing the unity of the church? In other words, how do you have a Catholicism that is culturally relativistic without destroying unity? Honest question. And the response is, the Pope was very clear when he made it clear that the church was not looking for a standardized model of faith. Synodality will not consist of a model in which everyone in every country says, this is how it has to be done. In his response to the General Secretary of SECAM, he emphasized that the respective local reality must be respected. That's the African bishops. There are many ways of being church, and that no single model of church life should be imposed. We emphasize the local church, but at the same time underline the importance of strengthening dialogue between the local churches, the level of the church provinces, the bishops' conferences, and the continent. The claim, he said, the author here says that there are many ways of being church and no single model of church life should be imposed, stands in direct contrast with the church's perennial teaching on unity, universality, and divine constitution. The Catholic Church has always understood herself not as a federation of culturally defined communities, but as a single, visible, hierarchically ordered society instituted by Christ. Her unity is one of the four essential marks: a unity of faith, sacraments, and governance under the Roman Pontiff. Popes from Leo XIII and Satis Cognitum to Pius XII and Mystici Corporis consistently taught that the Church possesses a determinate form, structure, and mission that do not fluctuate with sociological context, meaning the Catholic Church's form and function is the same whether it's in Africa or Ecuador or Chicago. Excuse me. To imply that no single model of ecclesial life should guide the Church suggests that her very constitution is malleable, evolving from below rather than received from Christ. And that is exactly the point of the modernists. Case in point, bearing archaeologism in mind, this news broke yesterday from the tablet. Common heritage of Nicaea can restore unity, says Leo in apostolic letter. So the Pope issued a new apostolic letter. You see a lot of people celebrating it, typically the Pope splainers and, of course, the progressives. The tablet is essentially the UK's version of the National Catholic Reporter, to give you an idea. Their quick summary is, Pope Leo XIV called on Christians to move beyond theological controversies that no longer serve the cause of unity and to rediscover together the faith professed at the Council of Nicaea 1700 years ago. In a new apostolic letter in Unitate Fidei, in the Unity of Faith, published on the 23rd of November, the Feast of Christ the King, the Pope links the anniversary of the First Ecumenical Council to the 2025 Jubilee and his forthcoming visit to Turkey, where he will take part in an ecumenical event with Ecumenical Patriarch Constantinople Bartholomew I before traveling on to Lebanon. And he is accused here of downplaying the filioque, the main dividing line between the Orthodox and the Catholic Church. AKC for the $5 super chat. Appreciate it. Says, every time someone writes being church, I cringe. Are they inventing a new language as well? Well, every religion comes with its own kind of linguistic terminology. So it would make sense for them to come up with a new religion, sort of a lexicon for the new religion. So a little bit more on that document. This goes to Catholic News Agency. Again, not a rad trad news outlet by any stretch of the imagination. Under this headline, Pope Leo XIV urges Christians to move beyond outdated theological disputes. So the controversy over the filioque is essential to Trinitarian dogma. It's not outdated. It's 1,000 years old, but it's not outdated. It is still like the main dividing line because it touches on a lot of things, but core to it, of course, is the very nature of the Trinity. Okay? They also question the authority of the Roman Pontiff to alter the creed. He altered the creed 1,000 years ago. Okay? To make it clearer what the Trinity, what the Trinitarian nature means. And I'll link a document here if you want at the Substack that goes into the controversy, obviously from a Catholic angle. And no, I'm not going to entertain the Orthodox angle. If you really want to, you will find no shortage of videos on YouTube or shortage of podcasts on Spotify and elsewhere that will explain to you from the Orthodox perspective just why the Catholic Church is a heretical institution that got it wrong and has been wrong for 1,000 years. If you want that angle, you can find it. But this is the main thrust of what happened. Pope Leo XIV has called on Christians to move beyond theological controversies that no longer serve the cause of unity and to rediscover together the faith professed at the Council of Nicaea 1,700 years ago. By the way, that kind of implies that the faith of the Council of Nicaea was lost, that we need to rediscover it. In a new apostolic letter in Unitate Fide, released November 23rd, the Solemnity of Christ the King, the Pope links the anniversary of the First Ecumenical Council to the Holy Year of 2025, to his upcoming apostolic journey to Turkey, where he will commemorate Nicaea's 1700th anniversary, take part in an ecumenical event with Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew on November 30th, before traveling on to Lebanon. I would like this letter to encourage the whole Church to renew her enthusiasm for the profession of the faith. The Pope writes, stressing that the Nicene Constantinopolitan Creed, quote, for centuries has been the common heritage of Christians, and it deserves to be professed and understood in ever new and relevant ways. In a strong ecumenical appeal, Leo XIV says the Nicene Creed, quote, can be the basis and reference point for a renewed journey toward full communion among Christians. It offers us a model of true unity and legitimate diversity, unity in the Trinity, Trinity in unity, because unity without multiplicity is tyranny. Multiplicity without unity is fragmentation, he writes. I just wish he'd say things actually clearly, but okay. We must therefore leave behind the theological controversies that have lost their raison d'etre in order to develop a common understanding, and even more, a common prayer to the Holy Spirit, so that he may gather us all together in one faith and one love. The restoration of unity among Christians does not make us poorer. On the contrary, it enriches us, he adds, calling the goal full visible unity, a theological challenge, even more so, a spiritual challenge which requires repentance and conversion on the part of all, end quote. And this is all just a smokescreen anyway. They all know that there will be no unity with the East. And you know why there will be no unity with the East? It's not only the filioque. The document Fiducia Supplicans was explicitly condemned by the Eastern Orthodox as being heretical, an abandonment of Catholic and Christian, more broadly, morality. That's why. They've also bluntly said something many of you will not like. They do not think the Novus Ordo Mass is valid. The Orthodox don't, because it was invented essentially in a synodal style workshop by a bunch of theologians, most of them Protestants. That is a fact of history. And they don't think it's valid. And those two things by itself will stop everything else from being solved, every other issue being solved. And the synodalists are so determined to defend those things that there's no chance that they will fix the unity problem in the church. They've said this multiple times. Catholics have this weird belief that we're going to be unified with the East any day now. If you've ever listened to Orthodox Christians of goodwill, who aren't like the very online ones who go after people, who show up in comment sections on channels like this and tell people to leave the Catholic Church and become Orthodox, not those guys, but otherwise Orthodox of goodwill. You know, you're going to find that they'll give you candid answers for what the problem is. And also, in general, that you'll find that the Orthodox churches have much of the same problems the Catholic Church does today. It's worth a reminder that Pope Francis got his worst ideas from the Orthodox. He just did. Amors Laetitia was inspired by Orthodox practices. Now we go to Life site. I saw some Pope splainers very upset at this article. I don't know why. If you actually read the document, it's pretty clear that this is not a misrepresentation anywhere of what's being said in the document. Headline: Pope Leo XIV downplays the filioque in a new apostolic letter. We must leave behind theological controversies that have lost their raison d'etre in order to develop a common understanding, he wrote. There's no question that that's what he's talking about. He published the letter and made reference multiple times to his trip to Turkey to talk to the Eastern Orthodox about the Nicene Creed and the Council, 1700th anniversary. The only thing that he could be referencing is the filioque controversy. In the text aimed at promoting the unity of Christians with reference to the first professions of faith, Pope Leo XIV cites the Niceno-Constantinopolitan Creed of 381 in its original form, without the filioque. This fully conscious choice is part of a broader discourse on ecumenism as a part of reconciliation, intending to establish a future common ground with the Eastern churches. We must therefore leave behind, the Pope concludes, theological controversies that have lost their raison d'etre in order to develop a common understanding, and even more, a common prayer to the Holy Spirit, so that he may gather us all together in one faith and one love. This does not imply an an ecumenism that attempts to return to the state prior to the divisions, nor is it a mutual recognition of the current status quo of the diversity of churches and ecclesial communities, he continued. Rather, it's an ecumenism that looks to the future, that seeks reconciliation through dialogue as we share our gifts and spiritual heritage. This is also the language right out of St. Pius X's Pascendi Dominici Gregis on the error of the modernists. Here he is citing vital imminence as a good thing when it's condemned by Pius X. His father John Lavelle says on X, in other words, we're getting rid of the Philocquy to appease the Greeks. Oof. It's not inaccurate to say that. And this is the new religion. Pretty sure the Orthodox are, as harsh as I can be sometimes to them, I will tell you right now, the Orthodox are far too sensible to fall for this. It will continue the way it has for the last 70 years, with dialogue, hanging out together, addressing common errors, but everything will be kept at an arm's distance. Because it's clear that the Church of Christ, the Roman Catholic Church, has got some problems internally, and they're just observing, going, what's going on with these people? And it's simple. It was diagnosed, the problems were diagnosed by Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre back in the 60s and 70s when he pointed out that it looks like the hierarchy of the church imbibed of the errors of modernism and drank deeply from the well of modernism. And in much the same way that if you returned home from work one day and your father let's say you lived with your father, you were taking care of him in his dotage, but you honored him and you did what he told you to do in matters where he had authority over you, such as the relationship an adult has with their father. Let's say you came home from work and you saw that he had knocked back an entire case of his favorite beer. And he was clearly intoxicated. And he started talking to you about things you would normally listen to him on and maybe and likely take his advice on. And he started giving you the most bizarre off the deep end advice possible, destructive advice. Would you take his advice? No, you wouldn't. Such as his attitude was Lefebvre's attitude towards the modernists running the Vatican for the last 60 years. That you recognize that they have some authority, but they've imbibed deeply of the errors of liberalism and of the errors of the modernists. And until they sober up, we'll resist them. That is what he had to say about it. Now, a good, very brief analysis of this new document comes from Stephen Cox posted it to X. He's also on Substack. You can find him on both. Very good work there. He says on X, in Unitate Fide proposes the exact scenario Pius XI condemned in Mortalium Animos. That is a papal encyclical condemning what we call classical liberalism. This is sort of the political philosophy and, yes, theology that underlies American politics, English politics classically, whereas they were, in the U.S., it was at one point where Democrats and Republicans were essentially in agreement on 90% of issues, to the point where there were just some issues nobody debated because they didn't need to be. They were both classically liberal. They broke off when it came to limits of the role of government and a few things, tax policy and things. Insaner times. You didn't get the feeling the other party hated the country. I'm sure some people will disagree with that. That's fine. You're entitled to your opinion on that. But at the end of the day, the underlying philosophy, the classical liberal philosophy, was condemned in Mortalium Animos. I have it on this channel. It's worth your time if you really want to be challenged. But here is Mr. Cox says, in Unitate Fide, it proposes the exact scenario Pius XI condemned in Mortalium Animos, quoting Pius XI. Here it seems opportune to refute a certain false opinion on which non-Catholics seek to bring about the union of the Christian churches. They add that the church is divided into sections, although having certain articles of doctrine in common, nevertheless disagree concerning the remainder. Therefore, long-standing differences of opinion must be entirely put aside, and from the remaining doctrines a common form of faith drawn up, and in the profession of which all may not only know but feel that they are brothers. Now, in writing that, Pius XI was writing, at least in part, about the World Council of Churches. Since like the late 19th century, the Catholic Church has had a standing invitation to join the World Council of Churches. The Catholic Church, even under the modernists, said, no, we're not going to do that. Now, who knows, maybe under the Synodalists, the next phase of the modernist heresy, they'll join the World Council of Churches, and all bets will be off. But Essentially, Pius XI condemned the idea that we must put aside the controversial articles of faith, focus on what brings us together, makes us good neighbors, watering down the faith, making it lukewarm. Now, Mr. Frank Wright here also, in response to this, points out that this looks a lot like the Arianism condemned by Pius XII in 1950 in Humanae Generis. They want to be set aside questions that divide Christians. But some, through enthusiasm for an imprudent Arianism, this desire to be united, seem to consider as an obstacle the restoration of fraternal union things founded on the laws and principles given by Christ. Remember, Catholic Church's core claim is that it was founded by Jesus Christ on the rock of Peter, guided in all truth by the Holy Spirit. To put aside theological questions that divide us from other Christians is to deny the principles given by Jesus Christ. That's Pius XII. A lot of this may sound like a 1,000-foot view of things. Let me give you an example. A few days ago, I reported to you on how Notre Dame University in the United States decided to put its Catholic principles, get rid of them out of their guiding documents for their staff. This you might have thought, well, wait, they acknowledged Catholic principles as guiding the university? Because for many of us, it was pretty obvious that Notre Dame was a research university and an athletics school. And then somewhere after that, right after, principles on being good neighbors and running local parks efficiently and doing charity in the name of secular values, somewhere after that was a nod to Catholicism. It wasn't exactly the most Catholic school and hasn't been for a very long time. And so when they updated their recent documents, they said, hey, we're just going to take these out of here. So they had like 4 or 5 points. I went over them in a previous video, and they sounded like every other secular college in the United States. They were indistinguishable from other top-tier private colleges with that do a lot of scientific research and athletics. You would not know the difference between that one and say, I'm in Oklahoma, OU and OSU are the big schools here. Their guiding print documents are very similar to what Notre Dame had, right? And you don't expect a defense of Catholic principles and mission from University of Oklahoma and Oklahoma State University. But you do expect them from Notre Dame, whose name is literally Our Lady, just with a bad American pronunciation. That's literally what the name means. Well, after they published this got into the secular media. The news sources I used in my initial report on this were from secular media. This caused a bit of pushback to the university. They must have gotten a lot of letters, emails, angry calls from Catholic donors who were like, what are you people doing? I'm going to cut off the funding because many of us have had enough of this nonsense. They were one of the forerunners of the new religion. Well, we get this update to this whole story from another secular outlet, from Newsmax, and they have tons and tons of ads on their website. We'll make it work, though. The headline, Notre Dame restores Catholic mission to core values. Now, what you are going to see here is a hilarious backpedaling. They're going to be like, whoa. We made a reference to a Catholic mission earlier in the document. Everybody missed that. And so it's on us for doing something that added to confusion. Yeah, okay. They knew what they were doing with this document. Notre Dame University was one of the 4 running colleges during the 1960s and the aftermath of Vatican II, the establishment of the Land of Lakes Statement. And if you don't know what that is, once upon a time, Catholic schools in the United States, whether they were high schools, junior colleges, or universities, whatever they were, they all adhered to the Catholic faith. They had them as its guiding principle, if you want to call it that, meaning a Catholic school was a Catholic school. And then after Vatican II, a group of bigwigs from a few universities in the United States met in Land O'Lakes, Wisconsin. Yes, as in the butter people, same place. And they put together a document called the Land O'Lakes Statement, which basically said, in the name of academic freedom and freedom of thought and all these other American ideas, we are breaking away from the Catholic Church unofficially. We are not going to be guided by these things anymore. We are going to affirm the Catholic faith, but we're going to have it be the guide stone as we see fit. So these schools all skewed heavily to the secular left, became institutions promoting the system. So what they became. Many Catholic schools followed suit, and many Catholic schools went out of business as a consequence of this. I know this because I worked in one that this happened to. Even though the university board brought in Catholics to actually try to reorient the school's mission back into line with the Vatican's response document issued in the 1980s to this, that it should be a Catholic school. Well, it didn't work. Here is what happened with Notre Dame. The University of Notre Dame has moved quickly to restore Catholic mission as a core staff value after backlash over its brief removal. A change school leaders now admit created confusion over the school's identity and priorities. In a November 21st message to staff, Notre Dame President Reverend Robert A. Dowd, meaning Father Dowd, said the university had originally placed its Catholic identity in the preamble of a new set of 4 staff values unveiled last week, believing that approach would emphasize its overarching importance. But the shift, he acknowledged, sent the wrong signal. Thanks to some constructive feedback we received, meaning they got a lot of emails, we now realize the placement is causing confusion, Dowd wrote. Some could interpret that not as elevating our mission as we intended, but as a sign of diminishing commitment. To avoid any further confusion, we have now included the language on Catholic mission as the first of our 5 core values. Catholic mission as is now the university's top stated value, defined as be a force for good and help to advance Notre Dame's mission to be the leading global Catholic research university. The remaining values, community, excellence, collaboration, and innovation, which are basically synodality plus innovation, follow. Dowd stressed that the Catholic character of Notre Dame, quote, guides and informs all that we do and how we work together, calling it a foundational force present from the university's founding and one that will always be her guiding force. Addressing staff directly, Dowd closed by expressing gratitude for their role in upholding Notre Dame's identity. I could not be more grateful for the many ways you embody the very best of Notre Dame. You inspire me with your generosity, kindness, and dedication to Our Lady's University. Take that as your evidence that sometimes writing your emails and sending in your petitions and things actually works. I don't know if they got petitions, but people sent in emails. People called them. I am certain some people showed up at the university president's office and talked to his secretary and asked for a personal meeting. It probably helped the people who did the more in-your-face things were either members of the media or were big dollar donors. But they did something. And it appears to have worked for once. Now, that doesn't mean Notre Dame's going to suddenly become a Newman List class university. For those who don't know, in the United States is the Cardinal Newman List. If you're looking for a Catholic school, find the Cardinal Newman List and send your kids there for college if they have to go to college. It might be complicated for you to do that because many of those schools do not accept any federal dollars, meaning no Pell Grants or student loans to go. But if that's not an obstacle to you, and yes, they have scholarship programs there, that's where you should look at least first. And Notre Dame is not trying to get on that list. Although maybe someday we will all get to witness the triumph of the Immaculate Heart and whatever civilization looks like after that. The universities that call themselves Catholic will actually be Catholic, and you will have no need for a Cardinal Newman List anymore. But until such a time, we need to be vigilant and defend the faith as has been handed down through the generations until just a few decades ago, when a bunch of men thought they were doing Jesus a favor by bringing his church into a more relevant space in the world. Until that time happens, until all that nonsense is undone through the triumph of the Immaculate Heart, we hold these people's feet to the fire. So if you're watching this and you called Notre Dame, good on you. You helped. And I say that as the person who is very cynical about letter writing campaigns, about petitions and things. Most of the time they don't work. But in this case, praise God, it worked. They're at least paying lip service to the mission. Meaning they've gone back to the status quo that we've all watched for the last several decades. Maybe rejoicing over that is not the best thing, because they were being more honest when they put aside the Catholic mission. Let me know which one you think is true in the comments. Are you happy to see that they've restored the Catholic mission? Or do you think they were being more honest and they got rid of it? Well, let me know what you think in the comments. And do you understand how this is a reflection of the new religion, as we talked about earlier? Let me know what you think in the comments, please. Hit like and subscribe. If you haven't, it does help. Sharing this on social media helps a lot too. Please pray for the church and everybody who spoke about negatively. The priest who runs Notre Dame University, any bishops involved in any of this, pray for all of them. The salvation of their soul is more important than just being angry about this. And as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.